Welcome to My Business Matters, the Michigan Chamber podcast.
Welcome to My Business Matters. I'm your host, Jim Holcomb, President and CEO of the Michigan Chamber of Commerce. Today, we're kicking off a special series on one of the most talked about and actually often polarizing and misunderstood issues facing Michigan's future, and that's data centers. As demand for digital infrastructure continues to accelerate, so do the questions about energy, water use, land use, economic opportunity, and community impacts. Over the next several episodes, we'll explore what's driving this growth, what's at stake for Michigan, and what responsible development of data centers could look like moving forward. We begin the series with authors of a new independent analysis, which was conducted by public sector consultants for the Michigan Chamber Foundation, the Detroit Regional Chamber, and Business Leaders for Michigan. Joining me today are Maggie Pallone and Jeff Guilfoyle of Public Sector Consultants. They led the research effort, and we're happy to have them here. Thanks so much for joining.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Why don't we start? Can you just give listeners a little background on Public Sector Consultants and how you got into this work with data centers? What drove you or what interested you about the topic?
Yeah, thanks. So PSC, Public Sector Consultants, is a nonpartisan research and consulting firm. We have offices here in Lansing and Detroit. And we don't shy away from working on hard issues. It's kind of our bread and butter. We like to think that we specialize in bringing facts and data to clear the log jams on big policy issues in the state, from trying to understand the smoking ban 20 years ago in restaurants to some of the biggest budget debates now. We pride ourselves in being able to bring facts and data to the conversation to move it forward. And so this felt like an opportunity to really dig into the facts to understand what are data centers, what do they mean for Michigan? What's the opportunity? What are some of the challenges, and are those challenges legitimate? Right. And that's what this report hoped to accomplish.
Yeah, I think having the facts and data is really important right now. I think we have so much political dysfunction. We have a lack of stability. We don't have great public discourse. And we have a lot of critical issues facing Michigan. It is about, we can all disagree maybe on the policy solution or our approach to something, but we have to agree on the facts. And we have to agree, hopefully, on the goal that we want Michigan to do better. How hard is it when you're trying to bring together a report like this to actually focus in on like one question or the series of questions, and how did you kind of determine what that focus was going to be on data centers?
I mean, there's so much conversation about data centers right now that it was easy to see the questions that people had. And so we didn't want to write a report that was pro data center, negative data center. We really wanted to put the information out there so that when people were having the debate about this, it was an informed conversation and they were armed with the facts and could really understood the issues better and how they worked in Michigan.
Yeah, how important is that? Just people understanding the issues, as you talked about, having an informed conversation. Everyone in Michigan, we all have elected leaders, we have policymakers, we have stakeholders. It's really finding that common ground where we can have the meaningful conversations and find some practical solutions, because data centers, and we'll get into it, no different than any other complex issues. People have difference of opinions, and but we have to agree on that we're going to move forward, I think, in a positive fashion.
Yeah, and the conversation is clearly moving right now. So I think it's important to be out there with the facts right now as this is happening, as we're looking at where to cite these and people are expressing concerns. We want to make sure that we can put that information out in the space so that, there's another side to the conversation. They can really understand all of the facts about data centers.
Yeah, Jeff brought this up when we were talking about the report rollout, that he felt like this was the most timely report he's ever worked on in terms of data availability. Every time we'd go to look at another question, another answer, there'd be another report out there talking about this, right? Even, I'm sure we'll talk about polling here in a minute, but even the polling and the shifts in polling. And so you said people need to kind of come together. Well, right now people are coming together against them, but they don't really know why. And so hoping that we can provide some information and data and facts around what this is, how Michigan currently regulatory structure is really structured, to give people some confidence that we can do it here in Michigan in the right way with a lot of the regulatory structure we already have in place.
Well, I think it's a great place to start. Actually, you talked about polling. It seems like this is an emotional issue for many people. And I don't know if it's contrived emotion or real emotion. So I'm interested to hear what kind of the public thinks about this. Are they just want to be no on everything? Do they just we want no technology, I'm scared by AI, and I think this is what fosters it? Or are there real concerns of what they're confused by or what they're searching for in an answer?
I think you said something incredibly important in what you just said. People are concerned about AI, and they're mixing and they're co-inflating that with data centers. And so I like to use this example as I'm trying to explain just why data centers are so important to our life, whether or not you're pro or against AI.
Sure.
15 years ago, we pulled out our Atlas, maybe 20 years ago to drive somewhere, right? And then we were all so excited that all of a sudden we had MapQuest and we could print off directions, right? And it would tell me where to turn and what to look for. And then just 5 years ago, we started using Apple Maps and we were so excited that we had some technology on our phone that would guide us. And today, we all expect that all of our friends driving down the highway using Waze are going to give us real-time data to tell us if we can get somewhere 20 seconds faster, right? And we're expecting that real time. And just that shift, if you think about just even how we drive and navigate someplace, is all data dependent. And a data center is necessary for that kind of computing. And so that's not AI, that's data demands, right? Our Netflix, we want to stream. We don't want to worry about that. I think only my 98-year-old grandpa is the only person I know that still uses cable. But so that requires, right? Yeah. It requires computing power that only exists if we have data centers. And so, the emotion around AI is real, and people can have serious policy conversations over whether AI is good or bad for the worker, for industry. But the fact is that our lives are wholly built right now on a digital platform and having that a bit available.
Does the public understand that? The people who are opposed to, they understand it always kind of, I find it ironic, maybe they organize a rally and they do other stuff. Everything they're doing is done digitally, how they communicate, how they save, how they use photos, how they get people to rally. That's all utilizing a data center. I'm wondering if people who are so adamantly opposed actually understand how it impacts their life daily.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a little bit of that. And then some of it's new, right? AI is new. And so it's unknown. And there's sort of this underlying angst about AI that's out there. But really, that's separate from whether or not we should build data centers, right? We're going to build data centers, but people have that underlying angst about it's a new technology. What does it mean for me? What does it mean for the economy? And then they have some, concerns that they raise in the polling. They're worried about electric rates. They're worried about water. And most people don't understand Michigan's electric regulatory system or how Michigan protects water. And so that's part of what we were hoping to achieve with this report, is to answer some of those questions. What are the protections in place for electric rates? What are the protections in place in Michigan for water? And are there places where we need to enhance our policies a little bit to make people a little more confident as we put data centers in?
Yeah, I think if we think about this baseline that we're starting from, I was out doing a public meeting a few months ago, and we weren't talking data centers, but somebody came up to me afterwards and they were worried about data centers. And he said, Maggie, I don't know why we need data centers when I have everything I need right here in my phone. And it was like, well, right? Like, okay, sir, let me try to explain this to you.
Yeah. It's not all here in this little
decided not to try to explain that to him. But I do think, as we think about where we're starting from, that's a starting point. That's where the public is right now. And so trying to get them from that all the way to being supportive, there's just a gap that we are hoping to fill.
Yeah, and that's why we were so excited to work with you, and we were so confident in the work that you're doing to try to have that conversation, because I believe, at least from the Michigan Chamber perspective, and I believe the Detroit Chamber and BLM are the same, you may not agree with opposition, but you have to accept it, that that's their point of view, and then we have to deal with it with facts and data and analysis. Somebody just may be obstinate and say, I don't care what it is, I'm no against everything, no now, no in the future, no forever. Well, there's nothing I can do with that person. But hopefully public debate and discourse will bring people along. Do you find, either in the polling or just when you talk to people, whether it's this issue or another one with the reports you do, are people moved by information? Are they intellectually curious? Do they take time to think about it and look at their opinion and say, you know what, I was wrong? Or, yeah, no, that really actually proves my point.
Well, our whole business model is premised on that people care about facts and data. So I hope that's true. I will say, a lot of our work ends up ultimately in the hands of groups like you, right, who are going to the legislature to push for something. And I do think that our work does help move the needle, at least in Lansing. I don't know how much we're influencing the countryside. Right? I don't know how, that's not generally our audience, but I do think that there is a silent majority still in Michigan that cares about facts and data. And we are completely drowned out by the 20% on the left and the 20% on the right that fills our feeds, and the algorithm feeds a narrative too.
Well, that's why I think public sector and your work is so important, because it is important. We need validated, trusted data and analysis, and that's what you provide. And that's why we just chose to work with you, because people don't believe everything and they're skeptical and they really only want something that reinforces their pre-existing notion. And we want to move the conversation forward.
Yeah, and I think you get people too, we get a bad anecdote from somewhere in the country where something went wrong with a data center, and it's okay, this happened in another state, but that doesn't mean, Michigan has regulatory protections to keep that from happening here. And again, people don't know that. And I think when people don't understand something, their default answer is always no. We see that in ballot proposals all the time. If you don't understand, you just vote no. And so part of the goal of the paper is to help people understand, to see, what regulations we have in place, and then also to help policymakers to say, look, we think data centers, can be important for Michigan, important from an economic development standpoint. There are a few policies that you can enact that would make the public a lot more confident in these going forward.
Yeah. Well,
we don't talk about this in the report, but I think it's an important thing for us to talk about maybe here just for a second, is that, Michigan, a whole bunch of data has come out. People are really talking about this, the state of Michigan.
Yeah.
And where we are falling in our median income, where we're falling in our educational outcomes, where we're falling in a whole bunch of different things. And this anti-growth mentality that seems to be dominating the conversation. And I don't know necessarily if people care if it's a data center or if it's a new anything, right? I just think that Michigan right now is in a no mentality, right? Like, we don't want to change, but we see this data all the time that we need to do something.
Yep.
And so it's a philosophical conversation about who Michigan is going to be in the next 50 years that I think this is just one piece of it.
I think some of that comes probably from the demographics of the state. I think we have a lot of people who are good, well-intentioned, thoughtful people, but they're scared and they're operating from a position of fear. And they're saying, I want what I had when I grew up in Michigan. And it's different now, and I'm scared, and I'm worried about my kids, and my grandkids don't live in the state because they can't find a job. So just stop everything, and that will take me back to what worked.
Yeah, or they think that we're still the Michigan of 1980, and we're just not, right? And so they're living this reality. They're living in a reality that doesn't exist.
And I think data centers is a perfect example of that. We think about infrastructure. We think of roads and bridges and tunnels and underground. Data centers is our digital economy moving forward. It's how we're going to have economic growth. And maybe, I don't think people really understand how much their day is into it, but just what the future is going to look like. Everybody's not a visionary. They aren't futurist. But in the next 10, 20, 30 years, the economy is going to dramatically change even more. And we need this infrastructure so we can keep up with other states who are investing. This is an investment in the long term in Michigan for our people and our economy.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point, right? It's an investment in the long term, but the investment is happening right now.
Yep.
So, this data center investment, a lot of it is going to go in the next 5 years. And we see this right now. People are trying to site these data centers. So you're right that it's for the long term, but the decisions and where these things are going to be over the next couple of years. They're all going to be sited and then built.
And we see this number, right? $2.8 trillion over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
But we have 18 months to compete for maybe 100 of these hyperscale data centers that are going to get located somewhere in the U.S. And they're starting to get driven out of some of the states that they're in. And so it's an opportunity, but Michigan has to do it now. Yeah. It's not a 5-year play. It really is this 18-month or so window.
Investment planning now.
Yeah, and we have seen some really good opportunities, right, are getting significant pushback. And so, that's a concern as well. We've seen a number of announced data center projects that ended up not happening. And we've got a couple that are on the table right now where you see, serious community pushback. Like we've got University of Michigan has an opportunity to work with, Los Alamos National Research Laboratory. Yeah. And they're struggling with community pushback for the siting of that data center.
Which is unfortunate. Well, let's get into the report a little bit and some of your key findings and kind of walk listeners through what you were finding in your research, and then maybe we could talk a little bit about some proposed solutions.
Great. Yeah. So our key findings can kind of be broken down into 3 key areas. The one Jeff just talked about it. There is undeniable opportunity here in Michigan. 2, there is valid public concern around lack of transparency, around some of the environmental challenges that they just don't know, and so they're scared of. And then there's a strong regulatory framework here in Michigan that can be the path forward. And that was one of our key findings. A strong existing framework here in Michigan. patchwork, which makes people not understand it, but on the whole, a strong regulatory framework, both for water protection, energy law, across the board.
Yeah, on some of these major concerns or major portions of the regulatory framework, what's the interaction between state and local governments, and is there primacy issues, and where should people focus on really making sure that we can have the strength we need to do data center development responsibly?
I mean, I do think it's a little bit of, regardless of where the policy's taking place, right, all politics is local. And so the pushback, where these things end up stopping is people are coming out and they're, pushing back against the zoning variances or whatever it is, even though their actual concern may be a state policy issue, right? They're, hey, I'm worried about energy prices. And right, we have a whole regulatory framework around that with the Michigan Public Service Commission, that are putting in place best practices for that. But then you see the community pushback is actually showing up at, the zoning hearing that takes place in a local community.
Yeah. What are the opportunities you see? That was the first thing you led off with. I'm interested to see how you kind of scan the environment as you look at development. What could that mean for Michigan in the future?
Yeah, I mean, straight up, the dollar amounts, right? Some of these construction jobs are huge. There's opportunity for thousands of construction jobs. The announcement of the Saline Township project, I think is $7 billion in investment. It's the single largest economic development opportunity Michigan has ever seen, right? We put cars on the road. Start thinking about that, right? The automobile industry was built in Michigan, and this investment is the single largest investment in Michigan's history. Yeah. So the scale of opportunity, I think, is hard for people to wrap their head around. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think even like you look at that investment in Saline, right? So that's a really large investment in Southeast Michigan. But then related to that, DTE and LG just announced jobs in Holland, Michigan to build a battery backup storage for data centers around the state. So that project in Saline is leading to jobs created on the west side of the state. Yeah,
they aren't going to just be isolated around there. What's the opportunity, not just even for maybe the construction jobs or the immediate jobs, what's it mean for the future in a region or for the state when you have this as infrastructure moving forward? What's the opportunity that's going to be lost if we don't go down this road? I don't know if you quantified that or if it's even quantifiable, but if it's more theoretical.
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity to leverage the data centers to try to get additional tech investment around there, either from the companies that are building the data centers or from the infrastructure we're putting around to support the data centers. So as we're running high-speed communication lines and power, that's attractive to high technology companies. And we have seen instances around the country where people have been able to leverage their data centers to get other high tech opportunities. Microsoft in Wisconsin is a good example. That investment has led to high tech business incubators, research facilities at the University of Wisconsin, all of which will help create high tech jobs in Wisconsin going forward.
The other thing, and it surprised me as a layperson in energy policy here in our state, that this investment really is an opportunity to actually bring down energy cost. Yeah. When you start thinking about putting this much demand on the grid, I think it's counterintuitive to think, oh, well, this is helpful for me as a ratepayer, but really it helps spread out this cost and its investment in our energy grid that wasn't going to happen otherwise. And so it's a huge benefit actually for ratepayers long-term to have some of these investments come into our state, both to help modernize the grid, but also some of the battery storage that they're talking about and the ability to handle peak load is incredible opportunity to have somebody else besides ratepayers pay for it.
When you talk about something like that, or if we reference economic development and all the benefits, is it just lack of trust? You referenced, Maggie, that this is larger than the auto industry when we started that. How come people don't gravitate to that and go, oh my gosh, I want that here in Michigan. We can really be a leader. Do they just not trust what the projections are?
I mean, I think a little of it is what Maggie started with about concern about what is AI's overall impact on the economy going to be, and just nervousness about that unknown. And that's separate from sort of the building of the data centers. And so, but in people's heads, I think sometimes those two things come together.
I hear a lot when I talk to opponents and they talk about water usage. What did you find on that topic?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think this is something where people point to what happens in Virginia or Georgia or Mississippi, and we see these stories about somebody's well running dry or your water turning a different color, and that's immediately what they think of what will happen here in Michigan, or water scarcity issues. And one of the benefits of Michigan is that we have an abundance of water. The Great Lakes Water Authority has something like 40% excess capacity. So you start thinking about, again, we just talked about the electric grid, but bringing on some of these large water users onto a municipal water system that was built to support 2 million people, that's now supporting 600,000 people. In Detroit, that number matches too. It's an opportunity to help some of our water utilities, actually. But in addition, we have a strong regulatory framework if you're not going to hook up to a municipal system to ensure that you're not having an adverse water withdrawal that would impact your neighbors. And we just have, I can't.
And we have tools for that too.
We have a tool, right? The water use tool.
You have to prove that you aren't going to have a negative adverse impact on your neighbors. I know a lot of times we've seen this in agriculture, that, the farmer's going to suck up all the water in my well will run dry and things. And I believe back in the 2000s, we started doing a water assessment tool to make sure that this is
first in the
addressed
nation.
on the front end to make sure that we're doing the analysis to not have the adverse impact.
And we've got technology now, right? So they use a lot of the waters for cooling these data centers, and you can use closed loop cooling systems with water where you end up taking the amount of water used by a data center from millions of gallons to thousands of gallons.
Can you kind of explain for listeners what is a closed loop system?
So basically you just use the same water over and over again to cool the data center, and then you end up using very little water at that point. I think Maggie's noted it's sort of like you go to being like apartment level use of water, like an apartment building. So it's a dramatically lower use of water. And so one of the things we talk about in the report is if you do have a situation where somebody's not using an existing municipal water center like the Great Lakes Water Authority that has tons of excess water, if you're putting it someplace where they might be extracting the groundwater, then use one of these closed loop systems so that the community doesn't need to be concerned about the water use.
Water in Michigan is so different than almost anywhere else in the country. And so it's an economic opportunity actually for us to leverage more so than it is.
Because we have an abundance.
We have an abundance. And so comparing us to what's happening in Arizona or other places where they have such water scarcity, those issues just don't look the same here in Michigan.
Yeah. What are you seeing when we're out in the public? Are these rational concerns people have? You talk about a framework. Like, what are some of maybe the recommendations, or what could people do to move the conversation forward? Say, I hear what you're saying. I understand you're concerned, but like as you were just pointing out with the water assessment tool, we have things there. What can we do to get this across the line where people really feel that their concern is addressed?
Yeah, we have a couple of recommendations, and Jeff can speak to some of them as well. I think one of the ones that we talk about is the Michigan Public Service Commission here in Michigan. We have a strong regulatory framework for our regulated utilities, our two large utilities. One of the recommendations we have is taking the best practices that the Michigan Public Service Commission has already adopted and already put into place for the approvals they've given to DTE and consumers, and have the legislature codify that for all regulated or for all utilities across the state. So we don't have to worry about it, right? If you're not under MPSC purview, you would still have those same protections in place, and the public could have trust that rate protections and other things are happening. Another thing that we raise, and I know it's not super popular for the business community as a whole, but the use of NDAs and just how to limit the use of those, because
that's a public trust issue.
It's a public trust issue. Whether or not it's good for your business in terms of protecting some intellectual property, it is bad for your business in terms of public trust.
Could you design those and limit them to things that are truly proprietary, technological, scientific advancements that are a competitive advantage, but still you could give the broad strokes about what's happening or what the program is?
Sure. You could put a time limit on it. So after a year, that information becomes public. You could have some sort of notification process so at least the public knows that an NDA has been implemented. Because I think what we hear a lot of is that not only is the public like, oh, there's an NDA, so I don't trust it. I didn't even know there was an NDA, so I didn't even know not to trust it. Yeah. And now it's like a double whammy in terms of public trust.
Yeah, and I think that actually is a valid concern. We've seen it in other issues, not this one, where politicians or other public figures use NDAs to hide, and they don't want to talk about it, and they try to use it as a blanket get out of jail free card with constituents. And I think that is wrong. And so I do think it's a valid concern. But as you're pointing out, valid concerns exist, but there are ways around them, and there are paths and strategies moving forward for responsible, practical development.
Right. I mean, we've got ways to protect the things that people are concerned about, energy rates, water usage, but it's got to be transparent. People have to understand, yes, your electric rates are not going to go up, and here's why, and provide all the detail. Yes, your water is going to be protected. Here's why it's not an issue on the waterfront or on the property taxes. Yes, this is going to generate a lot of property taxes. Let's be clear exactly how much you can expect as a community so that people are armed with that information and there's no uncertainty around it. Because I think it's that uncertainty that pushes people to know. The more certain they can be, like if people were confident, for the polling shows that people are concerned about water and they're concerned about electricity rates, but it also shows that like if they can be confident that their electric rates are not going to go up, then they're a lot more likely to support a data center in their community.
And I think we've seen the data center developers and these large technology companies, Microsoft in particular, has come out with like this bill of, and I'm not calling it a bill of rights, but kind of this like community level agreement that they're saying things like, the property taxes we agree to, we won't contest. And so communities can feel like they can have confidence that they'll do more for the grid than take away from the grid. So they're thinking about these kind of things. They're going to ensure that they don't have adverse water impacts. So companies are starting to hear this and think about doing it also on their own and recognizing that probably if they want to have these in communities, they need to be doing a little bit more.
Yeah, I think energy is a perfect example. I think this is where the business community, many of us would fall in line with consumers. We've always operated under the principle of cost of service. Pay for the energy you use. Don't subsidize across ratepayers and classes. And this would be an area where we would certainly get behind and say, we don't want, the residential customer negatively impacted on this. And if you're a developer, you pay for the cost of service.
Right. Well, and I mean, I think it's a good point too. I mean, data centers use a lot of electricity, but they're not the first thing to locate in Michigan that's a large electricity user. So we do have experience with this. We do have experience with protecting ratepayers. There's a list of best practices that are out there. And you can see if you look at what the Michigan Public Service Commission has been adopting, they've been adopting these best practices for the investments to ensure that that rates don't go up. So, I mean, it may be our first rodeo with data centers, but it's not with large electricity users. I mean, we're an industrial state. We've been dealing with large electricity users for a long time.
Yeah. What do you find on land use? Is that a concern for people? Are there things we should be doing in that area? I know, whether we're talking about data centers or solar fields up, there's always been this push and pull about how should private property owners be able to use their land, or what are community benefits of land?
Well, I mean, one thing we'll note is Michigan does have a lot of brownfields. And so I do think that people would really like to see data centers located in brownfields.
And a brownfield is?
So like a former industrial site. So if you think about Lansing, right, we have several sites that used to have General Motors plants that, people would love to see those sites redeveloped. They're formerly industrial, so the neighborhood is zoned that way. So to the extent that we can try to get these data centers located in those types of sites, I think people would be really in favor of that. I mean, some data centers are just too big to put in a brownfield, but for the ones that aren't, I think that it would, people would love to see some of those parcels of land get put back to productive use.
So in some instances, we could take blighted land, things that are an eyesore, things that aren't having economic benefit, they aren't returning tax revenue to the locals, and put it back into efficient use.
Which is a real win-win for a community, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the things that we actually recommend in the report, like how do we incentivize the redevelopment of brownfields for these type of sites? They already, most of the time, have electricity running to them. Some of the infrastructure is already built out. It just makes sense to put them there when possible. But, at the same time, if a farmer wants to make $250 million to sell his farm to a data center, I don't know that that's the role of government to tell them no. So
why would we take away that benefit of the person who invested in that land over the years? And
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a complicated issue, but again, I would say that it's no different than when we were talking these large sites for Ford, for Blue Oval, for other things just 5 years ago, right? People didn't want it in their backyard either. And we saw in Marshall a huge push to try to keep them out of Marshall. So I don't know that it's necessarily data centers than it is for what we talked about at the beginning, right? Like people not wanting to change their community, this NIMBYism issue.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example of what we don't want to have happen again. We push back on a lot of those projects. They went to other states, they went to Kentucky, and now we're scrambling to redesign what is our economic development strategy going to be in the state, because we lost out on those jobs. And it's not just the jobs of that one factory or that one plant, it's all the incidental and tangential jobs that go around to suppliers and the building communities and people with housing, and it has a real waterfall impact.
Yeah, and I think maybe we need to be a little bit better as a state at engaging these communities up front so that we can communicate the benefits of the stuff before the opposition really builds in a community.
Yeah, again, back to the trust issue. You have to have a trust and accountability, I think, to move public perception and bring people along.
Exactly. Yeah. You hear some of the numbers that are happening in these communities around how much dollars will they'll get in new taxes and what that could mean for a community. It completely transforms a community to have that much tax revenue coming in. I think, Jeff, right.
I mean, Saline, that's going to more than double what Saline collects in taxes, right? I mean, so it's
local benefit is huge.
Yes. Local benefit, but you want to make sure that the local community feels like they're going to get that benefit, right? That it's not just going into a black box of government money. They want to feel like they have a new park, that they have some says in what that looks like.
I know this probably wasn't any part of your research. I'm just wondering if you've seen it just as you look around the state. How much of the opposition is true local opposition and how much is ginned up by agitators or people who are trying to manipulate what happens in Michigan?
I mean, it's hard to tell from the outside. I do think there's local opposition. I mean, I think that's the case sometimes because, people know it's going to be in my community and they're worried about what that might mean. But also, I mean, always there's national groups that, that I think help organize this and, help gin up the opposition as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say, though, it's been interesting to see who supports data centers and who doesn't. It's kind of a mixed bedfellow of groups here. I saw, for example, the Michigan League of Conservation Voters has a policy around responsible data center development. They're not anti-data centers. So it's interesting to see who's been thinking about this and how there is support across a lot of different organizations for responsible data center use.
Yeah. Is anything in your report, do you come to a conclusion that we should have blanket approvals, blanket denials, we should have moratoriums? How do you see this issue moving forward? What's a good way to move forward?
Yeah, well, I think the challenge with a blanket moratorium or this 1 year kind of moratorium that I know lawmakers are talking about is we've missed the window.
Yes.
And I mean, all of the
that seems more like a political solution to get past November than it is to deal with an issue that's really going to move Michigan forward.
Yes. Yes.
Which is so frustrating because we see this on so many other topics, and we were talking recently. Michigan has a lot of challenges. We have so many opportunities. If we actually have the courage to make the decision, make the choices, and stick to a plan and move forward, instead of just kicking that can down the road and saying, how do I get past today?
I know a lot of people like to say that PSC just puts out the same reports or the same data every 5 years, but it's because nobody actually does what we said you should do.
Yeah.
So if you actually took the time to implement the thing and let it stick long enough.
So if we followed your report, then we'd be in a better position.
If you followed our recommendations once in a while, we'd be in a much better position and we wouldn't be debating the same things every 5 years. You asked, what's the next step in all of this? And I wonder if it's more that we need to do a better job of educating the public about what actually exists than we need to have any kind of wholesale changes to our regulatory structure. We have a strong regulatory structure here in our state. Yeah. Our energy law and the ability for the MPSC to ensure ratepayers are protected exist. Our water resources are well protected, and we have a lot of them. We have the ability to have people use water in our state in a responsible manner and not impact other people. If we could use some of these brownfield sites and redevelop them, huge opportunity for everybody. Where it really starts to fall apart is when the public just doesn't know what's coming at them. And so us figuring out how to better have communities know the benefits and communities not feel like they're surprised by, 6 months ago, all of a sudden, all of these town hearings started happening, right? Where people would be like, you have to decide in 2 hours to sign this agreement. That's never going to end well.
No, that was bad strategy, I think, by some of the proponents who said it was more of a traditional old school lobbying tactic.
Yes.
Build everything behind, only talk to the decision makers, then come do it quickly in a public hearing.
And it worked the first time, and then people found out that that's how they were going to operate, and then we lost 3 or 4 right away, right? So, yeah, lesson learned, probably not going to work here in Michigan to come in that way.
Well, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing properly.
Yeah, and I think we saw, the polling took a decidedly negative turn while we were doing this, and I think that also expresses the urgency that, a bunch of people went from saying they didn't have an opinion on data centers to saying they were opposed to data centers, that we've got to get out and educate people right now because people are clearly making up their minds right now, and so they need this information so that they, understand better what the issues are in data centers and the protections that are out there.
Yeah, and it kind of wraps back to where we started some of this conversation. We talk about polling. Is that needle movable on the public perception meter? If we're following recommendations, if we're having open discussions, do you believe this is an issue that Michigan actually can move forward on if we do it an appropriate way to build trust, have accountability and transparency.
I mean, I think you see a little bit in how they asked the polling questions, which was good, because they asked people, were they opposed to data centers and why? And people were, I'm worried about energy prices, I'm worried about water. And then said, well, if energy, you weren't going to face energy price increases if water was protected, would you support them then? And then they do change their answer. Mm-hmm. So I think if you can communicate to folks the protections that are in place, they will change their thoughts on data centers.
Especially on kitchen table economics.
Yeah.
Are you impacting my water usage, or are you impacting my electric rates?
Yeah, nobody wants their electric bill to go up. So you just got to be able to show them, look, your electric bill's not going to go up.
And as Maggie said, it could even go down in the future if it's done properly in implementation, if we have this. But I agree with you too. This is the time when we need to be investing in our infrastructure, and we need to be moving forward and modernizing our grid and making sure we have the baseload generation and to support not only the data centers that we hope will find a way to develop, but also the ancillary jobs around it and all the other businesses and entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I think I saw an announcement from DTE that if one of these data centers got approved, that it would actually be like a 2-year moratorium on rate hikes. So you're starting to see those kind of data points start to emerge, that this is really a downward pressure on rates.
Yeah, because with inflation, if you're holding still for 2 years, you're actually getting cuts.
Yeah.
So, well, we're coming to an end, but I want to go around. Any last thoughts? What are we missing? Or if you could highlight just for listeners on your report, let them know where they can get it, and also maybe a couple of the highlights of what you found and what you're recommending.
So I just say we quote the governor in the report, and I think I'm going to paraphrase the quote, but the governor says it really well. Like, we're going to have data centers. The question is not whether or not data centers are going to be built. The question is, can we build them in Michigan, and how do we do it the right way? And so the report talks about that quite a bit. I think it is a real opportunity for Michigan. We have the opportunity to really do this in the right way, and we should take advantage of that.
Yeah, so you can find the report on our website, publicsectorconsultants.com. I'm sure it'll be on the front page, and I'm sure that there will be a whole campaign surrounding the Chamber's website, too, to get this out.
Yep, we're definitely going to make sure we do these reports and bring you in on things like this, because we want it to be public education. This isn't just a tool that we're going to take the information and hold within to the Chamber membership. We want to make sure the public knows about this and let all your good works get out there and hopefully educate people and inform them and hopefully lead to better, more practical debates. So, Maggie and Jeff, thank you so much for joining us, for helping us bring facts, context, and perspective to an issue that's generating a lot of important conversations across Michigan. To read the full report, as Maggie said, you can go to publicsectorconsultants.com. And this conversation is just beginning. We're going to be continuing to explore the future of data centers in Michigan and how to responsibly navigate opportunities and concerns. Make sure to tune into this special series and learn more.